Hello, everybody. Welcome to this new edition of the Basu and Godin Notebook, your podcast on the Montreal Canadiens. I am Marc-Antoine Godin, and I'm alongside Arpin Basu. How you doing, my friend?
Doing well. Monday, October 16th, as you mentioned. Very familiar day at Canadiens practice when compared to last year.
Jeez.
Obviously, the news of, I would say, the Canadiens' most promising player from the beginning of training camp to now, Kirby Dach, gone with a quote-unquote significant injury. I feel like I've seen this movie before. I don't know. It's hard to sort of separate this from the end of and the entirety of last season.
Yeah.
Which was the reaction of everyone as soon as this news was announced. But, there's a lot of things that this impacts for the Canadiens. We don't know how long Kirby Dach will be out.
It sounds like it sounded all a bit ominous, though.
Sure.
Yeah. I think it's going to be a matter of months more than weeks.
Yeah, maybe. 6 to 8 weeks would technically be months more than weeks. But listen, it's going to be a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're safe in assuming that. So I think there's a lot of things that are impacted here, and we thought we'd kind of bounce back and forth with what sort of the impacts could be, what we're going to see from this, and I guess, why don't you get started? What do you think is, one thing that not having Kirby Dach anymore is going to change significantly for this team?
You know what? More than any line combination or him not being there and he's replaced by some other guy, I think that the biggest impact is on Dach himself. Here's a guy who was, really soaring. He was spreading his wings, and he's been stopped in his tracks with this injury. And Kent Hughes was again, yeah, and Kent Hughes was mentioning, not too long ago how individual development would be paramount this season, and that's really what he was looking for the most. And here's the situation when you got a guy who's really ready to pan out, and second game of the season gets injured. He's going to be gone for a long term, and it's the fact that he's going to suffer from a development point of view. I don't know if there's going to be any. It's too early to say that there's going to be any, remnants or any ill effects from that once he comes back. But my point is just this is valuable time that he could be spending playing games and getting into his rhythm, building on his confidence and his building on his strong preseason games and all of, the second half of last season. And now this has been stopped, clear cut and in game 2. So to me, that's the thing that sucks the most, because it's really on a personal level. How about you?
Me, it's Juraj Slafkovsky. I really think I thought back to last season and the moment when Juraj Slafkovsky seemed to be getting it sometime around late November, early December. That coincided with him playing with Sean Monahan as his center, and a few days later or a few games later, Sean Monahan was gone. He was out for the year. Now Kirby Dach's obviously not out for the year, but it just seems like this is a similar situation where Slafkovsky was looking really good, had an excellent training camp, looked good in the first 2 games, and has been tied at the hip with Dach throughout that time. And built a certain chemistry with him. And if you look back to last season and Juraj Slafkovsky's usage, one of the issues, not the only issue, but one of the issues was that he was never on a consistent line. He bounced up and down the lineup. He played 4th line, 3rd line, 2nd line. He was all over the place. And now it seemed like an intentional thing that Martin St. Louis was doing to create a duo with him and Dach. And he was responding well to it. Listen, just Monday, Martin St. Louis was talking about how he was happy with where Slafkovsky's going on the ice. He's getting touches. He's playing the game. All things that we even discussed. It's coming off opening night where he didn't do anything spectacular. He was just playing the game well.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of that has to do with understanding the flow of an NHL hockey game, the rhythm of an NHL hockey game, and a lot of that comes from or is established by your centerman. especially when you have a centerman as dynamic as Dach, someone who's as good in transition as he is, and someone who is able to secure possession as well as he does by winning back pucks, as Martin St. Louis mentioned today. And even Slafkovsky mentioned how well he possesses the puck. So it would be really unfortunate if everything you just said about Dach were to also apply to Slafkovsky. He has to relearn sort of some of the chemistry. And if he takes a bit of a minor step back, now I don't know if that will be the case. And the one thing I think that is good in this situation is that, to me, Alex Newhook has a lot of similar qualities to Kirby Dach. Listen, he's 5 inches shorter. He's roughly 20 pounds lighter. He shoots left as opposed to right for Dach. There's a lot of differences, but in terms of ability to transition the puck, in terms of ability to play low in your zone and win pucks back, his defensive zone play is a strength of his. So let's hope the transition is not all that rough for Slafkovsky, that he can quickly establish some chemistry with Newhook down the middle. And let's hope that, for his sake, that those commonalities between the two players will allow that transition to be smoother for Slafkovsky. And I found it interesting when Martin St. Louis mentioned, what Newhook loses in size to Dach, he makes up for in speed, and then he quickly specified foot speed.
Yeah.
And I found that curious. Maybe that was just a subconscious thing, but there's a difference between being fast and playing fast, as we've often mentioned. And when St. Louis mentioned that Dach has an elite brain, which is a hell of a compliment for Martin St. Louis, we'll have to see where Newhook's brain is at, and if his ability to play fast can match Dach's speed, because foot speed for sure, Newhook has the edge, but we're gonna find out to what extent his ability, to how fast his brain is compared to Kirby Dach's.
Yeah. So we spoke in an earlier episode about Slafkovsky and how he could take example on Dach for, how Dach has come into his own physically and learned to get the edge in his game that he didn't necessarily have in Chicago. And in that sense, Slafkovsky is, had a great example in front of him. Probably Dach could become a better example for him, even though he's a center, than Josh Anderson, who's probably more limited in his skill set. That being said, I think that Slafkovsky can become his own player, and even though he's a second-year guy and he's got plenty to learn, I think that he's got enough resources of his own and enough skill that even if he was to play with Newhook or come back with Monahan at some point, the Canadiens, I mean, we're smiling a little bit nowadays when Martin St. Louis says, well, I got a lot of good options. But you know what? That's true. Down the middle, it's not the worst thing that could happen to the team because they have, losing Dach's, it's really unfortunate, for the reasons I explained earlier. But they have resources at center. They have other guys that are truly capable. And I think that Slafkovsky can continue to improve even if he's paired with Dach, with Newhook, with Monahan, or who knows, one day with Suzuki. So it's not all lost. But you're right. In the short term, there was true chemistry between the two of them, and so it'll be interesting to see how he'll reconnect or mesh with another centerman now.
Yeah, and it just seems since the start of last season, every time Slafkovsky has gathered some momentum, he's had something that's cut that momentum, whether that's a change in the lineup, whether that's an injury, whether that's even his own injury, obviously, last season. So, yeah, we'll see. The other development on Monday as a result of Dach being injured was Josh Anderson being promoted to power play 1. Now, this is a thing. Like this, so now early this season, Martin St. Louis has put Josh Anderson on a line with Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield, something that we have repeatedly seen evidence of as being
not working super well.
That just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So Martin, his justification was that, listen, Anderson's made a lot of he's adapted his game. He's taking well to kind of the stuff I'm trying to teach him. He's more versatile. doing what the game, going to where the game tells him to go, making him more of an East-West player as a result. And I'd say the results have been so-so after two games. Let's see what happens on Tuesday. But so now Marty's doubling down on that because we've seen lots of evidence that Josh Anderson is not a very effective player on the power play. But there he was, PP1 on Monday in Dach's spot. And I really do think that changes a lot on the power play. It's, the results maybe have not been outstanding, but I think the actual watching the power play work, the top power play unit with Dach, obviously, especially on opening night, we didn't get much of a sample against Chicago, but on opening night, it was interesting to see how they were able to move Suzuki around and not solely have him in the right circle. There were some occasions where
mainly not. Mainly not.
Exactly.
He was more often in the bumper, and Dach was in the circle, and that was the same.
Having Dach allows them to do that.
Yeah.
There was one time Suzuki was in the left corner, like below Caulfield, making kind of a triangle with the bumper on that side, and so losing Dach's going to limit their ability to do that. I thought that was a very crafty thing for them to do, to try and kind of mix up their looks and not make it so obvious that they're going to attack from that right circle with puck on Suzuki's stick. But you can afford that luxury when you could just move Dach over and not really lose a lot of playmaking or vision or anything else. When you put Anderson in that bumper, you can't ask Anderson to go over to that right circle and sort of replicate what Suzuki provides there. So I don't know, but I think as a result of this, maybe that power play one is going to become a little bit more predictable. We'll see what the actual impact is. But
you're saying that the power play should become less predictable. I think even though it's been effective in terms of puck management and moving it around in the first two games of the season, I still think that it's too predictable because it's geared towards making Caulfield shoot, and you need to have a second threat. And at times I was thinking, well, seeing Dach on the right circle where Suzuki, used to be, he's so not a shooter. His instinct is so not to shoot that you're taking that option out because of the guy who's there, and basically that he'll look to pass first and foremost. He might pass through the seams and make amazing passes, but he's not necessarily going to have the instinct to shoot, even though he's got a good shot. Whereas Suzuki's interesting because if he decides to curl back into the slot in the same way that Alex Kovalev used to do back in the day, well, he can be a threat to shoot too or to pass. So in that sense, I'm glad to see Suzuki back in that spot. But yeah, if you're going to put Anderson in there as a bumper, I'm not sure it's the best candidate, but who would you see instead of Anderson?
Well, they were somewhat limited in their options, right? Because that is clearly sort of a right shot heavy unit.
Yeah.
When you're attacking from the right side, ideally you'd have a right shot in the bumper, and obviously you have the right shot in Caulfield in the left circle. Dach also being a right shot, I think it came down to probably Anderson or Ullinen as the two remaining. You weren't going to put Gallagher in that spot, although I guess you could, because
again, he's done it. He's done it in the past.
He's done it in the past, not all that effectively, but he has done it in the past. So those are your options. You have Anderson, Ulonen, and Gallagher as your right shot options. So I guess an argument could be made of those three. Maybe Anderson's the best option. I think Ulonen would have been an interesting choice to go with, but we'll see if that ultimately happens. But yeah, that's just another area of the game where Dach's absence is going to be felt, and sort of the ripple effects of that is going to limit what I thought was an interesting kind of strategy early in the season, something they clearly talked about during training camp but didn't actually show much of during training camp, was this sort of moving Suzuki around and making him a bit more of a rover than anything else. So
yeah,
I think we're probably not going to see that as much as we did on opening night, at least.
I know that we discussed, you and I, earlier today, maybe seeing Newhook on power play one, but for the reason that you mentioned, that the similarity between Dach and Newhook being first and more foremost on the way that they carry the puck. If obviously Suzuki seems to be the main puck carrier on PP1, I think that Suzuki being the main puck carrier to do zone entries on PP2 remains a good combination, though.
You mean Newhook on PP2? Yeah.
Yeah. Who did I say?
You said Suzuki. That's okay.
Yeah. No, Newhook on
also,
PP2.
And the other thing is Suzuki. Yeah. I'm sorry, Newhook being a lefty. Yeah. Now we're getting really confusing. Newhook being a lefty. PP2 is actually now kind of almost better configured for attacking from the left circle, because now you had Tanner Pearson and Raphael Harvey-Pinard rotating in the bumper spot where Anderson was on PP2.
Mm-hmm.
If Newhook's kind of quarterbacking that power play unit from the left circle, now he has a lefty in the bumper and a lefty in the right circle in Slafkovsky. And so, when Anderson was there, it was kind of awkward setting him up from the left side. And Slafkovsky was actually the one who was trying to set him up more often than not. Now you have kind of a similar dynamic from PP1 to PP2, where Newhook can kind of run things from the left circle. You have obviously Gallagher, right shot, not ideal, but he's there on the. Actually, it's not so bad actually. But anyhow, it's right shot as the net front. He plays a kind of a different role from Monahan in the sense that Monahan's more of a goal line guy and Gallagher's a net front guy. So it doesn't really matter which way your net front guy shoots, more or less. And so you have now Newhook, a lefty, with the Pearson/HP combination in the bumper, Slav, another lefty, and Jacky, another lefty up top. So who's a real shooting threat, obviously. So maybe this actually works out better for PP2. But
you mentioned HP on the power play. I think there are two guys that really benefit in a certain way from the injury to Dach. There's Newhook, because he's he's going to be able to go back to the center position. It's his natural position, and prove himself to his new team. But the other one is Harvey-Pinard, because there's sort of a domino effect. He was playing on the fourth line, and now he's going to end up playing with Suzuki and Caulfield against the Wild, replacing Anderson in that spot. So that's pretty interesting, because he was playing on the PK. Now he's going to be playing PP2, and he's going to go from fourth line minutes to first line minutes. So that's quite something. But he's a deserving guy, I think, to be able to do that.
He is a deserving guy because he's a guy who has shown that an ability to play with good players, and that's really something that is a skill unto itself. And the one thing that he showed last year is his ability to facilitate. There was a while that he was playing on a line with Suzuki and Anderson. Josh Anderson was really impressed with how he just is always in support of whatever they're trying to do, whatever him and Suzuki were trying to do. Spoke to Alex Burrows about him, because he was also a guy who was a great facilitator, a guy who had a similar skill set to Harvey-Pinard, and proved that he was able to play with good players, made a career out of it, is in the Ring of Honor in Vancouver as a result of his ability to play with the Sedins. So he said, I kind of asked if he sees a little bit of that in Harvey-Pinard, and he didn't deny it. He said, yeah, it is there. So that's an interesting development for sure, and we'll see how Harvey-Pinard does on that line. But history would suggest that he should fit right in. And the interesting byproduct of that is that at least we were talking about the chemistry Slafkovsky had with Dach. Well, Anderson, Newhook, and Slafkovsky was the combination to start training camp and the scrimmages and everything, and they were really the one line that looked really effective when there were like 1 million people in training camp at Canadiens training camp, but they were doing the scrimmages and they looked pretty good. So maybe that whole chemistry aspect is something that Marty has in mind, presuming that Anderson's going to be on that line because he's being taken off the top line, because shockingly that didn't work that well over the first two games.
Yeah, but it's good because Anderson and Newhook, they're both super fast skaters, and Anderson and Slafkovsky, both big guys. And Slafkovsky has shown that he can follow, even though he's not as fast as guys like Anderson or Newhook. He's certainly fast enough to follow the play and be involved. He's not going to be hampered by his skating whatsoever. He's a powerful skater in his own way. So I like that balance that it provides the lineup. Obviously I would prefer to see Dach in there, but if it was needed to have Harvey Pinard put in that spot with Suzuki Caulfield. Well, there you go. And I really liked his game also on the PK. I thought that he brought a level of pressure and offensive threat to the PK that we had not seen maybe since Paul Byron. Because I think that there were 3 different occasions: a 2-on-1 with Evans, a mini breakaway onto himself, and then that pass that led to the Monahan goal. He made the PK a lot more interesting and a lot more. Well, he forced the other team to stay on their toes. Despite the fact that they had the man advantage. So that's a part of his game that I really like.
Yeah, it's just his ability to pressure the puck and retrieve pucks and do some of the. And frankly, he's kind of better at Anderson even at doing these things. Is just kind of winning board battles and getting pucks back for Suzuki and Caulfield. And I think him and Suzuki showed excellent chemistry last season. So
yeah,
pretty logical reaction to what was some pretty bad news on Kirby Dach. I just want to quickly mention this. Christian Dvorak practiced today. Non-contact jersey. Again. So really losing a center when you have Christian Dvorak wouldn't be much of an issue. And Christian Dvorak's been skating for a long time. Today he has a non-contact jersey, but I saw him take contact. There doesn't seem to be much concern over Christian Dvorak in practice.
No.
So Martin St. Louis was asked today, does this mean that maybe Christian Dvorak will come back earlier? And his answer was immediately no. Why? Because Christian Dvorak can't come back earlier because he was put on off-season LTIR, which means, as we've mentioned already on this podcast, he has to be out for a minimum of 24 days and a minimum of 10 games.
Yeah.
So be nice to have Christian Dvorak. Be nice to have Christian Dvorak right now, but they can't. Yeah. Even though looks pretty healthy. I don't know. He looks fine. So this is kind of the bed that they made. And listen, it made their season opening roster that much smoother. It really facilitated a lot of things. It allowed them to enter the season with Carey Price on the roster, then put him on LTIR after the fact and all that stuff that we wrote about and talked about. Everything leading up to the season was facilitated because basically the only player they had to paper, instead of having to paper a whole bunch of players to get under the salary cap, they only had to paper Arbor Xhekaj, and that actually was very convenient for the Canadiens because Arbor Xhekaj is one of the only players who's eligible to go down to Laval that does not have a bonus attached to his contract. And I'm not going to get into all the reasons why, but basically sending players down that had bonuses attached to their contract, like Gouli, Barron, Harris, I think.
Even Slavkovsky.
Slavkovsky, for sure. Slavkovsky being the biggest case.
Yeah.
Papering those guys would have been punitive in the sense that when they came back up, their cap hit would have been calculated including their bonuses, as opposed to the bonuses being sort of separated as it stands now. Like Slavkovsky's cap hit is not his full performance bonus included number. So anyhow.
Well, you didn't want to go into details, and you did, and
I thank you for it. Yeah.
I thank you for it because it's better like that. So we'll wish Kirby Dach a speedy recovery.
Christian Dvorak too. Let's wish Christian Dvorak a speedy recovery because we're concerned about him.
It's well on its way, Arpin. I think that the recovery is doing well. From my, I'm no doctor.
It'll come roughly around the first week of November.
Exactly. We're 2.5 weeks away.
Miraculously. Yeah.
Exactly. So
a medical miracle he is.
Oh my. Okay, so we asked you we asked our listeners
audience?
And our viewers, our audience.
Speaking of which, listeners, you got to remind everyone. Viewers, listeners, and we were asked to remind everyone that we are not only available on YouTube. We are available on Apple Podcasts. We are available on Spotify. We are available in audio form, and that's actually, it's where our origins lie. So we did ask our viewers and listeners, and we just encourage you all to check us out in audio form if you don't have time to check us out on YouTube. But yeah, we did ask for mailbag.
We're very portable.
We're very portable. I prefer it in audio form. I don't consume too many podcasts on YouTube. I know a lot of people do, and I'm very thankful that people have been so far. Thank you for checking out the podcast on YouTube. But yeah, I've always been more of an audio guy when it comes to podcasts.
Okay, so all you guys and gals, we asked you to send us your questions because every Monday is going to be mailbag time, and boy, did we receive questions. That's crazy.
Yeah, we got lots. Thank you.
We cannot go through all of them today because honestly, that would make for too long a podcast. So, but at the same time, we want to answer as many as possible because, if only to acknowledge the fact that hey, we hear you, and that's good. So, let's we could get started because we had a fairly good selection there. Arpin, you want to get started with the first one?
Yeah, this one comes in from Nicolas Cote or Nico Kutz on Twitter. By the way, the questions came in on our Twitter handle. So if you're not following Basu and Godin on Twitter, you should be, or on X, you should be. And this is where Nicolas' question comes from. He says, with Emil Heineman's injury, which is also going to be a long-term, it's indefinite, the Rocket announced on Monday. If you're management, what would be the strategy to recall the next player? Will you leave Joshua Roy in the AHL as long as possible and recall Yoel Armia because he is a vet? Or call up Roy as quickly as possible to see how he's doing? Thanks. So we thought we'd start with this because it's kind of relevant with the Kirby Dach injury that presumably at some point the Canadiens will probably want to call someone up, even if it's not against Minnesota. And so I find this interesting because, listen, it's great that Joshua Roy scored in his first two AHL games. The second one, I think in particular, was pretty impressive, and he's looked good. But we always talk about rushing guys to the NHL. So the guy scores in 2 consecutive games. Like, let's get him up to the NHL. What's he doing down there? He's wasting his time. No, he should stay down there. He should stay down there as long as he can. Go through a slump, get out of that slump, go through just learn professional hockey. And for once, the Canadiens have legitimate prospects in the American Hockey League, like really legitimate ones. Keep them there. And, you have the luxury of a Yoel Armia. You have lots. You have Lias Andersson down there. You have a lot of interesting, sort of hardened AHL player. I mean, Yoel Armia is not an AHL player. Let's be clear. I mean, he's a legitimate NHL player. Lias Andersson is 7th overall pick, but is a quality AHL player who would be a legit call up that would allow their kids to stay in Laval and not enter in a quasi emergency situation. It's not a huge emergency, but I mean, it's. I think it would be best to allow guys like Roy, like Riley Kidney, Philip Meshar, if he ever gets into a game, these guys, like, they have to, let them marinate. This is a luxury the Canadiens have. There's no pressure for them to win at the NHL level this year. There's no reason to make any rash decisions. Development is and should be the number one concern. So I think leave Joshua Roy until he proves that he is absolutely wasting his time in the AHL.
Yeah, exactly. You need to make him hungry and showing that he is, and I don't doubt that he is, but at the same time, I mean, let him prove himself over a longer period of time. And if the Canadiens are serious with the fact that it's not that they're done with Yoel Armia, but they wanted to give him time to find his form after his injury, blah blah blah. Well, if they choose to turn to a youngster right away this early in the season, well, basically might as well bury Armia for the rest of eternity.
Yeah, I think, that's the beauty of having Armia there. Okay, so this one will go to you, Marc-Antoine, and it's a similar question from two listeners. They both came via X. Sid Banerjee, who's a colleague of ours who writes for the Canadian Press and I've known for a very long time. He's a fellow Bengali, so hey, Sid. How do you manage an AHL roster the equivalent of 1.5 teams while maximizing development opportunities? A similar question was asked by Adam, also on X, who says, are the Canadiens planning on moving out some forwards in Laval, i.e. sending them to Trois-Rivières? Seems less than ideal to have younger guys sitting. Marc-Antoine, what do you think about this?
It is true that it's less than ideal, but you know what? It's the same situation year after year. I remember 2 years ago, I went to Laval very early in the season, and I interviewed Michael Pizzetta, and he was, he was telling me how he had just moved into a new apartment in Laval, and he was into the moving stuff, and but he was not playing. And because he was stuck and he was wondering, am I going to be sent down to Trois-Rivières? But I don't think so. And I just need to wait my turn and all that. And less than half a season later, he was in Montreal. So things evolve very quickly. So even though there's an overflow of players right now, and it's undoubtable. I mean, there was 17 forwards on the roster to open the season. That's crazy.
90.
Yeah. So that's a lot of people. So I understand the impression that it's too many, but it's crazy how either because of injuries that happen in Montreal or that happen in Laval itself, and you just had two now. You have Dach and you have Heineman. It creates a movement, and the situation will resolve itself naturally. So it's not to me. It's not. I'd be very surprised if 3 weeks, a month from now, the Rockets still has a situation where they have to scratch like 4 or 5 prospects that they need to develop.
Yeah, that's for sure, and that's something that I happened to run into Paul Byron after the game on Saturday. Just to kind of say it was a cool moment. I don't think they showed it on television, but they did acknowledge Paul Byron's retirement in the building. He was sitting in the stands with his family. He got a very nice ovation. I kind of went to him. I was like, "Hey, I thought you were gonna lose it there." He's like, "No, not gonna lie, I almost did. I almost did." He was very, very touched by the reception he got. But he is obviously in a player development role with the Canadiens now. He's at practice just Monday morning on the ice, having a long chat with Jesse Lunin. But he has been going to Laval, and I asked him about the situation. He said the exact same thing. He's like, "Yeah, not great, not ideal, but you know how it is. Things change, things happen, and all of a sudden they're calling guys up from Trois-Rivières to fill out the roster in Laval." So it's this is I think last year's experience has left some scars on this organization, and I think this is one reason why they're willing to tolerate this, because if you'll remember at one point early in training camp, after rookie camp, actually, to kind of sum up rookie camp, Rob Ramage and Francis Bouillon spoke to the media. And one thing Rob Ramage mentioned is no roster limit in the AHL. So he was excited that a lot of these kids will be in the AHL in that environment. And when I asked Kent Hughes about that comment, he said, "Well, the one thing we don't want is to have players not playing in Laval." Yeah. So, but that's over the course of an entire season. We're a week in. It's been a couple of games. It's very early. If this situation were to persist, I think the Canadiens would do something about it. But as it stands now, hell, listen, if both the Rocket and the Canadiens lose an impact player every 2 games, this situation is not going to last very long. So
no.
it's something just to keep in mind that, it's early, not ideal, but I joked about it earlier, but Philippe Machard is going to get into games. They're going to make sure that he does, and they're going to make sure that he's not sitting for too long. And so it might seem unmanageable now, but it's not. It might not be for long.
No, and I don't think that the organization would be too averse with him returning to juniors. I don't know until when. What's the prerequisite to send him back to juniors? If once they're committed to the AHL, he has to stay there for the whole year. I have to check the agreement in that sense, but I think that as much as Machard himself doesn't see himself in Kitchener this year, I don't think that the Canadiens would have been too disappointed if he went back to juniors to try to dominate this year, because he did not do that last year.
No, probably not. And there was also some chatter about him possibly latching on to a team in Sweden.
Yeah, but they don't want that.
I don't think they want. They definitely don't want that, because they want him getting used to the smaller ice. But they do, like, the whole thing with Machard has been to manage not only his development but his own psyche and how he views his own career. I think it's been a bit of a balancing act that's not been necessarily smooth all the time. there was a big push from his camp for him to play in Laval last year, and the Canadiens
Yeah.
had to convince him to go to junior. Ultimately, the experience was not great. I mean, a lot of it was he really enjoyed his billet family, but from the time he came back from what was actually a very good World Junior for him, the production dried up, and he started doubting himself. And now, so I personally think the Canadiens keeping them in their sphere, in their ecosystem, would be a good thing. Just because, not to be overly dramatic, but you don't want to lose a prospect this early in his development. But yeah, we'll see. It's this, but this isn't helping. Him not playing the first two games definitely doesn't help.
Sure.
It doesn't, it doesn't help the organization. It doesn't help him. So we'll see.
He's a first round pick. Yes, not forget.
First round pick. You gotta nurture it a little bit. All right, here's one for you. Another one for you. This comes from Adrien, who goes by Lacrousty on X. Then we'll get to our email questions in a sec. But before Hughes traded for Newhook, you had checked his name as a possible target to possibly recreate a Dach Like trade. Yeah. If you had to do the same this year, who would you target? Marc-Antoine, I give you the floor on that one.
Yeah. Okay, so there's two caveats to that. First one is that I'm not sure if it's going to be the Canadian strategy yet again this year to try to do that sort of trade after the season. When we talk about a Dach-like transaction, we're looking at a player who's just finishing his entry-level contract, that the team that drafted him might have soured a little bit on him, and the Canadiens still believe in that player, thinking that the player, either Dach or Newhook, has a lot of potential, and they do the necessary to acquire him and say, well, we're going to be the ones really launching his career for good. So to me, it seems like a very smart play, no matter where you are into your cycle. But if you have if you have the assets to go after, to make that sort of trade, it's always a good move because it keeps you young as a group. But let's assume that they do, and that they would still be looking for that. The other caveat is that, a player finishing his second or third year in the NHL and becoming an RFA at the end of this year, they'll need to play
his entry-level contract.
Well, yeah, they need to play this season before the team says, you know what, maybe we're not convinced about that guy anymore. So there's a whole year to be played out. Mm-hmm. That being said, who would fit the bill? There's two guys that I'm going to watch this season in particular based on that. One is Dylan Holloway in Edmonton, who hasn't had a lot of luck with injuries so far. I'm sure that he's in their plans, and I'm sure that he's I'm sure also that they're going to try to find a good spot for him. They're not really, the Oilers are not really squeezed by the salary cap next season, and let's not forget that the cap will go up rather significantly. But who knows if Holloway has a disappointing year in their eyes, maybe that they'll sour on him a bit. But it seems to me like he's the style of winger who's got skills, but he also has some grit. He really fits. He's got that connection with Newhook. He's got that connection with Caulfield too. I would easily see him in the Montreal Canadiens uniform. So that's one guy that I would keep an eye on. And the other one is Kent Johnson in Columbus. Kent Johnson, who had
That's weird.
I know. Well, he had 40 points as a rookie last season in Columbus. Yeah. He was scratched in the first game of the season. I think he played something like 11 or 12 minutes in the second game as a third-line winger. I'm not sure what sort of chair they see him fitting in, but now they've got, not only do they have Boone Jenner at center, but they're trying to fix the center position by having Patrick Laine there. Adam Fantilli obviously is going to have an audition and will be like a top-flight centerman for them for a long time. You've got Cole Sillinger there. So most likely Kent Johnson's future in Columbus is on the wing, which is not a bad thing even by Montreal's perspective. I think Canadiens will look to have like higher end wingers even more than centermen, considering what's available to them. But we'll see. But those are two guys that I've identified. There are others, obviously, in different positions, but yeah. So I'll go with Holloway and Ken Johnson.
So I have one guy that I'm curious about, and that's Quentin Byfield. Now,
Oh yeah,
I don't think the Kings would not obviously are not even thinking of trading him. I don't think, but I do think it's probably a big season for Byfield, where he's going to have to show something. So in that category, and this would obviously be a huge trade. It would not be cheap to go. You're not getting him for 2 picks like you did Newhook, or 1 pick like you did Dach. Or actually, it was also 2 picks, but not as significant a pick. But he's a guy that if the Kings are entering a window, if he doesn't demonstrate this year that he's going to be part of that window and part of that mix of a championship caliber team, then maybe the Kings get interested. Maybe the Kings can be enticed. I don't know, but that's a guy. That's a guy I'm going to be watching.
Yeah, that's a good pick
this year. Yeah.
Yeah. On the email, on the Basu and Godin at gmail.com, we had Thomas Mihalyevich who wrote this question. So, Arpin, this one will be for you. My question is about the situation between Elias Pettersson, the Vancouver Canucks, and his contract. At the risk of getting my hopes high, as many of us did with Pierre-Luc Dubois last offseason, I can't help but listen to what Elliotte Friedman had to say in a recent podcast with respect to Elias Pettersson and Vancouver and get my hopes up yet again. Quote, since Pettersson came out and said, I'm not sure yet, I think Canucks have also kind of indicated we aren't sure either, because if there's any doubt Pettersson wants to make a commitment, I'm not convinced that the Canucks, want to make a commitment. So if the question is, if Pettersson actually became available, do you think there could be an opening for the Canadiens here? So
here's my thing with that. I think a big reason why, Elias Pettersson is unsure with Vancouver is he's looking for a situation where he's going to win and where there's a clear path to winning. And I think anyone looking at the Vancouver Canucks from the outside are left scratching their heads a lot, with a lot of the decisions that are made there and just what's going on there. So that suggests to me that Pettersson might be scratching his head a little bit too. My thing is that why would you go from a situation in Vancouver with an uncertain path to winning to a situation in Montreal that's maybe not quite as cloudy, but is not clear? The Canadiens don't have a clear path to winning as they're currently constituted. It's not really an obvious thing. Now, you could argue that the Canadiens' prospects and players as grouped currently with Pettersson added to it does create a clear path to winning, and maybe he would see it that way. But, the one thing that's worth mentioning is that in Pettersson's case, yes, his contract is expiring at $7.35 million a year. He was a restricted free agent with arbitration rights.
Yeah.
And he's still a ways away from unrestricted free agency. Still a couple of years after that from becoming an unrestricted free agent. So this would take a monumental trade. This is not a question of going out and signing a guy. This would take a massive trade where the Canadiens would have to provide the Canucks with something they're looking for. Now, as luck would have it for the Canadiens, what the Canucks need are defensemen. They need lots of them. They have Quinn Hughes. They have Philip Roenick, who's not signed past this season. And then it's just kind of a potpourri of really uninteresting kind of guys, and they did draft a defenseman in the first round, if I'm not mistaken. Did they not take Sandin Pellikka?
Yes.
Am I wrong on that? Yes. So that's one, but they're not really swimming in quality defense prospects. So the Canadiens have lots of them, and they are swimming in them. In fact, we had several questions asking about that situation. So maybe, and I'm saying maybe.
Actually, Sandin Pellikka was drafted by Detroit, not by Vancouver.
Right. Who did Vancouver? No, Vancouver drafted Willander. If I'm not mistaken.
Yes, they did. Yeah, at 11, it was Tom Willander. Yeah.
Yes, that's the other Swedish defenseman. Yeah. Anyhow, so maybe there's a fit there. I don't know. What I would suggest, don't get your hopes up on this. It's not a very likely turn of events. But if that becomes an avenue, and if Pettersson decides that, this is not a place I see myself long term, instead of getting into this game where he signs short term deals and just walks himself to unrestricted free agency, maybe the volume of quality prospects the Canadiens have on defense would be of interest to the Vancouver Canucks. But it's hard for me to see that actually becoming a reality. It's
hard to consider.
I would think the Canucks would want NHL level quality back, not prospects.
Yeah, well, it's hard to imagine the Canucks parting ways with Elias Pettersson to start with. I mean, you've got
exactly.
He's their franchise centerman. I mean, why would you get rid of your best player? He's not. It's not as though he's got he's in a position where he becomes arbitration eligible. But I mean, it would be a serious. I'm not sure if he's got all the bargaining power to force that situation upon the Canucks. And
no, he doesn't. But I mean, I think the one scenario would be like maybe the Canucks want to get ahead of it, not find themselves in a situation like the Jets thought they were in before actually winding up signing Hellebuck and Scheifele for 7 years. And so, but not being in a situation really that Calgary was in last year with Tkachuk, where he's a year away from UFA. Pettersson would be more than a year away, but it's when a player makes it clear that he doesn't see a future with your team, then keeping him around is not forcing him to stick around is not always the best course of action. So I guess that's the one window, but I still don't see it. I mean, that would be my advice: is don't get your hopes up.
Over the course of the summer, Kent Hughes, I think it was when Jeff Petrie was traded to Detroit, he said, "Well, we want to keep some money and some flexibility to make a big move." And a lot of people thought that there was another big move coming before this season, whereas clearly it was thinking about next season. It was more on the long-term vision. And I think that the Canadiens slowly but surely are setting themselves up to make that sort of acquisition. I'm not saying that it's going to be Pettersson, but I think that they're getting into a zone where they've got the trading assets to make a significant acquisition. They will have the cap flexibility to do so. They've got tons of picks also. So they're in a good spot. I don't know if it's going to be Pettersson, but I understand where the question comes from, because I think that next summer, this is the sort of thing that I could see happen. But the quality of player, as high as Pettersson, there's not going to be half a dozen guys like that available in the market. So which is why the question is relevant, because if an opportunity presents itself, like these are the types of opportunities the Canadiens have to be on the lookout for. Yeah, and the last thing I'll say on that is that the path that you were talking about that he might not see with Vancouver, I think that's where the famous word progression needs to be shown this year in Montreal, because the path to winning is not winning today, especially not when you're 24 like Pettersson. You have a long runway ahead of you, but this Montreal team needs to show that they're clearly in the right direction, and that the pieces that they got, if they grow properly, can turn into a contender, let's say in, 3 years time maybe. So that's what he should be looking for.
So let's finish up the mailbag segment with this. Further to that, there was Mathieu Gilles Lancio who sent us an email. By the end of the season, the Habs will likely have too many young NHL caliber defensemen. Is there enough space in the lineup to work at increasing their value? And if not, who would you trade for that? For what type of asset? How about you answer this question now and again in January? My guess, it's a next year place. It's a next year nice problem to have, but it's coming. Another one from Marc Caron on X. With Hudson conceivably starting his Montreal career at the end of this NCAA season, that puts the left defense at Gouli, Matheson, Jacky, Hudson, Harris. Do you see a lefty being traded this year? Marc-Antoine, what say you to these? And there were many other questions very similar to this, and I think this is actually a very common concern / curiosity for Canadiens fans, is what are we going to do with all these defensemen?
Well, I think that first of all, there's going to be too many defensemen the day that Hudson proves that he's ready for primetime hockey and he's ready for the NHL on a regular basis, who knows? He might need some seasoning in the AHL for a little while. So we'll not jump into conclusions. But if I just play the game and follow along, I think that the odd man out in this equation is clearly Jordan Harris, because he's got interesting tools, mainly his skating, but I don't see him being like a guy who's got a dimension apart from his skating that will protect him from internal competition. At some point, if you're not a dominant defender or if you're not generating a whole lot of offense and you become neither this or that, I think you expose yourself. And he seems to me like a guy who, in a more specialized type of blue line down the road, he could end up being a guy who just plays 5-on-5, which is pretty much what's happening right now early on in the season. And that's never good for the long-term prospect of a defenseman on the blue line. So he's one guy. The other ones, I don't think that, they could, if need be, they could move a guy to the right side. But
they can move Harris to the right side.
No, I know, but even after they move Gooley, even after they move Harris, and they end up with Madison, Gooley, Hudson, and Jackeye, one of the four could move maybe to the right side. Who knows? But that involves, it's definitely a problem for next year. But I see in the tea leaves, to me, there are two guys that are more vulnerable to be traded down the road, and it's Justin Barron and Jordan Harris.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you said. The one thing I guess I would say to the general feeling of concern over this is defensemen take longer. Mm-hmm. And it's harder to write off a guy that has a skill set at 21, 22, 23 even on defense than it is at forward. So, I look at the training camp Matthias Norlinder had. Never could have seen that happening in a million years, and it just provides a reminder that not to write off talented defensemen, because sometimes it takes them longer, especially when they're coming over from Europe. And so, David Reinbacher is presumably going to come to North America maybe as early as March, but definitely his first full season in North America will be next season, whether that's in Laval or Montreal. It's going to take him some time. Caden Gooley's an exception. Caden Gooley, Arbor Jackeye even is an exception. It's not often you step right into the NHL as a defenseman and look great. That doesn't happen that often. So when you look at the big group of defensemen, not all of them are going to hit. I think Justin Barron's showing now, but even Justin Barron, Justin Barron, perhaps next year he'll be next year's Norlinder, where he comes in and blossoms, because the skill set's there, the tools are there, everything's there. Size, skating, all of it. So, I think it'd be important not to jump the gun and trade a guy that you're going to regret afterwards, unless, of course, you find yourself in a situation like we just finished discussing, where you have a team that needs defense prospects and and you're talking about a high-end offensive player that would fill a massive hole for the Canadiens. Then, of course, use your wealth of prospects, use your strength organizationally to go get that asset. But to trade him for the sake of trading him and to get something for them because you think you can pencil in that Lane Hudson's going to be here and Logan Mailloux is going to be here and Reinbacher will be here and Gooley will be here. It's hard to say. The runway's longer for defensemen, and so it's something worth keeping in mind.
It's way, way down the road.
Yeah.
It's certainly not for the short term.
No. Yeah. So let's just let things play out. And I think that's how the Canadiens are going to approach it, frankly.
Yeah. Hey, Arpin, I wanted to ask you, because among the questions that we received, there's Amelia Pond who wrote to us about the opening ceremonies, and I wanted to have your take on that. Because actually, she wanted to have our take on that. But I'd be curious to hear you first on how how it played out. How did you what'd you make of it?
Well, Amelia began her note saying, "What was with the opening ceremony? It was so boring. I thought we were in Toronto." Well, I was actually in Toronto and in Montreal for both opening ceremonies, and let me assure you that Montreal's opening ceremony was nowhere near, on the dull scale, it was nowhere near Toronto's opening ceremony. I'll tell you that right off the bat. It was different, but you know what I liked about the Montreal opening ceremony is it didn't take very long. They kind of got through it, and this is something Montreal has a tradition of putting on great ceremonies. I would argue that them toning down the home opener a little bit is not the worst thing in the world. Let's save like the really cool, longer ceremonies for things that are significant and not just this, not something that happens every single year, you know, like which is a home opener. So that was my feeling on it. I also saw some degree of symbolism in coming out in position groups, you know, emphasizing the team. I thought that was interesting. There weren't huge bells and whistles. I kind of liked the way the whole thing opened, with Yvan Cournoyer sitting at center ice and saying, what was the quote I had? It's l'équipe c'est nous, c'est vous. You know, it's yeah. So it's, and then they had shots of like Nick Suzuki walking in Montreal, talking to people, Caden Gooley walking into his store, really kind of creating that connection between the players and the community. I thought that was a good theme to hit on, but I wouldn't be opposed to the Canadiens picking their spots a little more often. Like, let's not make everything a 25-minute long, drawn-out.
Well, the thing is, it was last year. It was, you know, that tunnel that the players came out of, it took forever. So I think that's where they wanted to cut on that and make it shorter. So by bringing a bunch of guys at once, that's what happened. Yeah. So I think that you could present them one after the other, but still not having to watch them walk the tunnel. I mean, the only guy for whom walking the tunnel was really impactful and significant last year was Carey Price.
Yeah, 100%.
But for the other guys, I mean, it's like, guys, can we get this moving already? Yeah. So I don't mind it, but I think that there's in the past they've set the bar so high in terms of I would say prestige. Would it be the proper word in English for that? But
no, they just maintaining their reputation for doing these things well. You know, I mean, I think that's what. There's always this inherent pressure on the Canadiens whenever there's a moment that requires a pregame ceremony, for them to nail it, because everyone in hockey widely recognizes that no one does things like that better than the Montreal Canadiens, and historically, no one has.
But it can be with the lights. It can be with the type of music that you choose. You know, there's a way that it's the whole scenography of the thing that could be elevated a little bit. Personally, the fact that it was shorter, I didn't mind at all. And as for the torch, I think we both agree on that. I think that the torch should remain a playoff thing, wherever that may be, whenever that may be. But that's the torch and the whole ice lighting on fire. I mean, that's a cool playoff thing. And you know, there hasn't been. You know, I don't mind it like when they name a new captain, like that would be appropriate. You know, if ever Nick Suzuki is no longer the captain of the Canadiens, when they name a new one, to have him take the torch from a former captain is a cool touch, and I like that. But yeah, I think the Canadiens stop taking themselves so seriously all the time. You know, it's like sometimes it's okay to just present your players and play the game. It's like it's not the end of the world. It doesn't have to be a 5-star spectacle, that rivals the Cirque du Soleil or whatever. Sometimes it's okay to just, and trust me, if anyone believes that sometimes it's okay to just present your players in a very quiet building, it's the Toronto Maple Leafs. I mean, I saw that on Wednesday night. It was awful. But you saw the banner, the raising of the banner in Vegas. I mean, they're all but quiet. They brought this thing to a new level. It's kitsch. I mean, it's kitschy. It's corny.
I would hope if the Canadiens have to raise a 25th banner at the Bell Center that they would go all out and do a proper ceremony and not have one like we saw on Saturday night.
Yeah.
But just to start a season, I was fine with it. I know a lot of people were annoyed and didn't think it was that great. I thought it was fine. I honestly, the speed of it to me was good. I want the game to start. I want the players get their moment in the sun, and actually for all the staff, that's really the only time the fans see the staff, most fans don't care, but for the staff, it's their one chance to say hello and hey, I'm here.
Yeah,
I'm going to be working like crazy for the next 6 months and not really going to see the light of day over that time. But training staff and some of the other the strength and conditioning stats, video staff, people like that who work so hard. It's a good little moment of recognition for them. But I'm okay with the Canadiens kind of not dampening and not even making it worse, but just making it less grandiose every time.
I like grandiose.
That's fair. That's fine. And I'm sure a lot of people in the comments are going to disagree with my take, but that's my take. That's how I feel about it.
So everybody, thank you so much for sending us your questions. Don't hesitate. Do that. I mean, every Monday we'll read a few of them and answer a few of them. So you can go.
Maybe not as many in Monday's future. We want to kind of get as many as we could into this episode, but still, please keep sending them in for sure. We won't. And we love to hear from you. Just in general, a lot of the people who submitted things this week weren't even questions; they were just comments on the podcast and how they liked it. So whether you like it or hate it, send those comments in. We don't mind. It's we love hearing from you at all times.
And we're improving our game. Our lighting is getting better. Our cameras are getting better. Yeah. I've taken a step back from the camera. We listen to you guys. So
I remain as close as I was before, but have a light, have a new camera. So we're getting used to this, the video aspect of the podcast, but obviously, as I mentioned earlier, the audio is still there. And don't forget, if you do want to reach us, Basu and Godin on X and basuandgodin@gmail.com by email. We check them. We love hearing from you, and we'll talk to you on Friday. There's after another game on Tuesday against the Wild, and the slow start to the Canadian schedule continues.
All right. Goodbye, everybody.